Hopebringer was a beacon of hope in the vast, indifferent expanse of the galaxy. A hospital ship of immense size and technological sophistication, it carried not only the advanced medical equipment of Earth, but also the ideals that humanity had clung to for centuries: compassion, cooperation, and the sanctity of life. Its mission was simple: to provide aid to those in need, no matter their species, allegiance, or painted in vibrant white with universal symbols of peace emblazoned across its hull, the ship was a reassuring sight in regions of space torn apart by war and strife. Inside, the corridors of the Hopebringer buzzed with activity. Doctors and nurses moved swiftly from ward to ward, tending to the wounded and the ill. Patients of every imaginable physiology were treated with care: humans with broken bones, reptilian species suffering from thermal burns, and crystalline beings who required specialized sonic therapies to mend their fractures. The crew, a mixture of humans and alien volunteers, worked tirelessly, embodying the ship's motto: healing knows no boundaries. Among them was Dr. Laura Cross, the chief medical officer. Her every step echoed her resolve as she moved through the intensive care unit, checking on patients and coordinating with her staff. Laura had been aboard the Hopebringer for nearly a decade, her dedication unwavering. Though the long tours of duty often took her far from Earth, she never wavered in her commitment to the mission. She knew the risks. Operating in neutral zones, especially near volatile regions like the Krathen-controlled territories, was always dangerous. But the Hopebringer had always relied on the respect for the Galactic Accord, which deemed hospital ships untouchable. No one, not even the most ruthless regimes, dared violate that sacred law. At least, that had been true until now. On the bridge, Captain Arjun Malik monitored their route. The Hopebringer was en route to a neutral colony ravaged by a recent skirmish. As the captain scanned the star charts, his first officer, Commander Vecta, an avian-like alien with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit, approached. "Captain," Hector said, her voice carrying the slightest tremor, "we've detected an anomaly on the long-range sensors, a cluster of ships, moving fast, directly on our trajectory." Arjun frowned, his fingers pausing over the console. "Can you identify them?" Vector's feathers ruffled, a sign of her unease. "Krathen warships, sir. At least 6 of them." The bridge fell silent. The Kraton Empire was notorious for its disregard for diplomacy and its penchant for violence. Their presence so close to the neutral zone was alarming. "They have no reason to engage us," Arjun said, though his tone lacked conviction. "We're clearly marked as a medical vessel." "Captain," Vector replied cautiously, "we cannot assume they will respect the Accord." Arjun nodded grimly. "Raise shields and send a broadcast. Identify us as the Hopebringer, a hospital ship under protection of the Galactic Accord. Ensure the message is repeated on all frequencies." As the crew worked to send the signal, Laura arrived on the bridge, summoned by the sudden change in atmosphere. Her usual calm demeanor faltered as she caught sight of the tactical display. The red blips of the Krathen ships were closing in. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Krathen warships," Arjun explained. "They're heading straight for us. We've sent out an identification signal. Hopefully they'll back off." "But," Laura's eyes narrowed, "and if they don't?" The captain didn't answer. He didn't need to. Minutes stretched into agonizing eternity as the Hopebringer continued its course, its shields now raised but its weapons systems inactive. Standard protocol for a medical ship. On the main screen, the Krathen fleet came into view. Sleek, predatory vessels, their hulls bristling with weapons, moved in formation like a pack of wolves encircling prey. "They're not altering their course," Vector reported. "In fact, they're accelerating." Arjun's jaw tightened. "Broadcast again. State that any attack on this vessel is a direct violation of the Galactic Accord. Make it clear that the consequences will be severe." The communication officer complied, the message sent once more, but the Krathen ships did not respond. Instead, they opened fire. The first volley struck the shields, sending a shudder through the Hopebringer. The crew scrambled, alarms blaring as the ship's automated systems attempted to compensate. Patients screamed in the medical bays as the sudden jolt threw them from their beds. Laura rushed back to the wards, barking orders to her staff to secure everyone and stabilize the critical cases. On the bridge, the situation grew dire. The Krathen ships were relentless, their weapons designed for destruction rather than precision. The shields of the Hopebringer began to falter under the sustained assault. "Shields at 40%, Vecta shouted. "We can't hold this for much longer." Arjun slammed his fist against the console. "Damn it, we're a hospital ship, not a battleship." As the Hopebringer struggled to evade the onslaught, a devastating blast breached its shields. The explosion tore through the aft section of the ship, destroying entire medical wards and sending debris spiraling into space. Hundreds perished in an instant. Laura barely managed to stay on her feet as the shockwave rattled the ship. She looked around at the chaos in the medical bay, at the injured who now faced even greater peril. Her heart ached, but there was no time to grieve. She had to act. "Get the critical patients to the escape pods," she ordered. "Everyone else, brace for impact." On the bridge, Arjun knew the Hopebringer couldn't withstand much more. "Send a distress signal to Earth," he commanded. "They need to know what's happening." The communication officer hesitated. "Sir, the Krathen might intercept." "I don't care," Arjun roared. "Send it." The distress signal was sent, carrying a desperate message back to Earth. But it was too late for the Hopebringer. Another barrage struck the ship's core, causing catastrophic damage. The once proud symbol of peace and hope was now a burning wreck, its pieces scattered across the void. Laura, along with a handful of survivors, managed to escape in a pod, watching in horror as the Hopebringer disintegrated. Her fists clenched, her heart heavy with grief and fury. The Krathen ships didn't pursue the escape pods. Their mission was complete. They had sent a message, one they believed would instill fear. But they were wrong. On Earth, the distress signal was received, and humanity's response was swift and unyielding. The distress signal from the Hopebringer reached Earth in the quiet hours of the planet's rotation, when much of its population was asleep. However, in the Command Operations Center of the United Earth Defense Coalition, the UDC, there was no such thing as rest. The facility, buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, buzzed with activity at all hours, manned by a rotating crew of strategists, engineers, and military personnel. When the signal came through, chaos erupted. General Thomas Kane, a veteran of countless diplomatic standoffs and one of Earth's most respected military minds, stood in the center of the operations room, his stern gaze fixed on the holographic display of the Hopebringer. The ship's location, trajectory, and current status were being transmitted in real time until the signal abruptly ceased. A small red icon, signifying the ship's distress beacon, flickered before disappearing altogether. "Status?" Kane demanded, his gravelly voice cutting through the clamor. Lieutenant Rachel Singh, one of the lead analysts, turned to him with a grim expression. "The Hopebringer's transponder has gone offline, sir. Final telemetry indicates catastrophic damage. We've detected debris in the surrounding area, large enough to suggest total destruction." Kane's jaw tightened. "Survivors?" Singh hesitated, consulting the rapidly updating data streams. Escape pods were launched before the ship went dark. At least some made it out. The general took a deep breath, steadying himself. The Hopebringer was not just a ship. It was a symbol. Its destruction would ripple across the galaxy, shattering the fragile alliances Earth had worked so hard to build. And worse, it had been a blatant violation of galactic law, an attack on a vessel that should have been untouchable. "Who's responsible?" Kane asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Krathen Empire," Singh confirmed. "Their fleet moved into the neutral zone just hours before the attack. They didn't even attempt to disguise their movements." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. The Krathen Empire had long been a thorn in the side of the Galactic Council, refusing to adhere to treaties and operating with near impunity in the galaxy's less regulated regions. But this was something new. This was brazen. Kane turned to Admiral Sofia Ramirez, his counterpart in the Naval Command. She had been silently watching the proceedings, her sharp eyes scanning the data with an intensity that suggested she was already formulating a plan. "What's our readiness level?" Kane asked her. Ramirez didn't look up. "The First Fleet is on standby at Luna Base. Second and Third Fleets are conducting routine patrols, but they can be recalled within hours. Fourth Fleet is docked for repairs. It'll take a week to bring them up to full strength." Kane nodded, and the Eclipse? Aspientos Ramirez's expression darkened. "Fully operational and combat ready. If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, you'll have no argument from me." The Eclipse was Earth's most advanced warship, a product of decades of covert development. Outfitted with experimental weaponry and cutting-edge defensive systems, it was a vessel designed not just to match, but to surpass anything the galaxy could throw at it. Until now, it had never been deployed in an offensive capacity. But this was no ordinary situation. "Send the order," Kane said. "I want the Eclipse mobilized immediately. Alert the First Fleet to prepare for deployment. And recall the Second and Third Fleets. We're going to need every available ship." Ramirez gave a curt nod, already issuing commands to her staff. Kane turned back to Singh. "What's the Council's response?" "They've issued a formal condemnation," Singh replied, her tone dripping with frustration. "But they're urging restraint. They don't want to escalate the situation." Kane let out a bitter laugh. "Restraint? They just slaughtered thousands of civilians, and the Council's worried about escalation?" Singh hesitated before adding, "They're also requesting an emergency session to discuss sanctions." "Sanctions," Kane repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "We'll see how far that gets." As the preparations for Earth's response continued, the surviving escape pods from the Hopebringer were picked up by nearby vessels. Among the survivors was Dr. Laura Cross, who was immediately debriefed by UEDC operatives. Her account of the attack was chilling in its detail. She described how the Krathan ships had ignored every attempt at communication, how their weapons had torn through the Hopebringer's shields with ruthless efficiency. Her voice trembled as she recounted the explosion that had destroyed the medical wards, her colleagues and patients reduced to nothing more than memories. But her fear was overshadowed by her anger. "They knew what they were doing," she told her interrogators. "They targeted us because they could, because they thought no one would stop them." Her words found their way back to Kane, who replayed her statement in his mind as he stood in the operations room, watching the holographic display of Earth's fleets assembling. He knew the stakes were higher than they had ever been. The Krathan Empire wasn't just testing Earth's resolve. They were testing the galaxy's willingness to uphold the principles it claimed to hold dear. As the hours ticked by, the First Fleet gathered at Luna Base, its ships gleaming in the pale light of Earth's moon. The Eclipse took its place at the center of the formation, a silent titan among giants. The crews worked tirelessly, loading supplies, calibrating weapons, and reviewing their mission parameters. There was no room for error. In the Command Operations Center, Kane and Ramirez reviewed the final plans. "This isn't just about retaliation," Ramirez said. "We need to send a message." Kane nodded. "And it needs to be one they'll never forget." When the fleets were ready, Kane addressed the personnel gathered in the operations room. His voice was steady, his tone resolute. "Today we stand on the edge of history. The attack on the Hopebringer was not just an attack on Earth, it was an attack on the very principles that hold this galaxy together. We will not let this atrocity go unanswered. Our mission is clear: to show the Krathan and anyone else who dares to challenge us that humanity will not be underestimated. Let this be the day they learn what it means to provoke Earth." With that, the order was given. The First Fleet, led by the Eclipse, launched from Luna Base, its engines igniting with a ferocity that mirrored the determination of its crews. The Second and Third Fleets, still en route, would rendezvous with them in Krathan space. The galaxy, watching from the sidelines, braced itself for what was to come. Humanity was no longer a silent observer, it was a force to be reckoned with. and the Krathen Empire was about to learn that the hard way. The first fleet emerged from the darkness of hyperspace in perfect formation, a constellation of steel and firepower glinting against the backdrop of distant stars. At the center of the fleet was the Eclipse, an imposing warship that embodied humanity's unyielding will. Its sleek angular design was both beautiful and intimidating, its hull bristling with advanced weaponry that had never been seen outside Earth's secret military installations. Behind it, destroyers, cruisers, and frigates moved with precision, each vessel coordinated by Earth's Central Command. On board the Eclipse, Admiral Sofia Ramirez stood on the bridge, her sharp eyes fixed on the tactical holograms projected before her. Her crew worked tirelessly around her, their faces lit with the blue glow of consoles. Ramirez had been at the helm of many missions in her career, but this one carried a weight she had never felt before. This wasn't just a military operation. It was a reckoning. "Fleet status?" Ramirez asked, her voice calm but commanding. Commander Julian Stark, her second in command, responded without hesitation. "All ships report ready, Admiral. Weapon systems are primed, shields are at full strength, and the second and third fleets are on schedule to rendezvous with us in 6 hours." Ramirez nodded. "Good. Maintain formation and keep all eyes on those Krathen sectors. They won't know what hit them." The fleet's destination was a Krathen-controlled star system on the border of neutral space. Intelligence reports indicated that several key military outposts and shipyards were located there, critical infrastructure for the Krathen war machine. These targets would be the fleet's first priority. However, Ramirez knew the Krathen were not fools. They would be prepared for retaliation, and the coming confrontation would likely be one of the bloodiest in recent history. As the fleet advanced, the mood on board the Eclipse was tense but focused. Crew members moved with purpose, their movements precise and rehearsed. In the engineering bay, Chief Engineer Marion Vance oversaw the final diagnostics on the ship's experimental plasma cannons. These weapons, designed to punch through even the most advanced shielding, were Earth's ace in the hole. "How's she holding up, Chief?" Ramirez's voice crackled through the intercom. Vance wiped her brow with the back of her hand, smearing grease across her temple. "She's running hotter than I'd like, but she'll hold. Just don't ask me for more than 3 sustained volleys or we might melt half the ship." "I'll keep that in mind," Ramirez replied with a faint smile. "Good work, Chief." In the medical bay, Dr. Laura Cross, one of the few survivors from the Hopebringer, prepared for the inevitable influx of casualties. Though she was still haunted by the horrors she had witnessed, she had thrown herself into her work with a fervor born of both grief and determination. She couldn't save the patients she had lost, but she could ensure that those fighting for justice had every chance to survive. Laura, one of her nurses, a young man named Aaron, said softly, "You've been on your feet for hours. You should rest." She shook her head. "There's no time for rest, Aaron. Not now. Not until this is over." As the fleet approached its target, the Krathen response came swiftly. Long-range sensors detected a sizable enemy force mobilizing within the system, their ships converging on the human fleet's trajectory. The tactical holograms on the bridge of the Eclipse lit up with red markers as the Krathen ships were identified and categorized. "They're bringing everything they've got," Stark observed grimly. "Battlecruiser cruisers, carriers, interceptors. This is going to be a slugfest." Ramirez smirked. "Good. Let them come. We've got a few surprises for them." She turned to the communications officer. "Patch me through to the fleet." Moments later, her voice echoed across every ship in the formation. "This is Admiral Ramirez. We are moments away from making history. The Krathen think they can slaughter innocents and walk away unscathed. Today we prove them wrong. Today we show the galaxy what humanity is capable of. Stay sharp, stay focused, and trust your training. For Earth, for the Hopebringer, let's make them remember this day." The response was unanimous, a chorus of voices affirming their readiness to fight. The fleet tightened its formation as the Krathen forces came into view, a massive armada of dark, jagged ships that radiated menace. The two fleets clashed in a symphony of chaos and destruction. Earth's ships unleashed their full arsenal, firing plasma beams, railguns, and missile salvos that tore through Krathen formations. The Eclipse led the charge, its plasma cannons firing devastating bursts that obliterated enemy ships in single shots. The experimental drones deployed from its hangars wreaked havoc, slipping through enemy defenses to disable critical systems with surgical precision. But the Krathen were no mere pushovers. Their battlecruisers bristled with heavy weaponry, and their swarms of fighters harassed Earth's smaller ships relentlessly. One of Earth's frigates, the Vanguard, took a direct hit to its reactor and exploded in a brilliant flash of light, a stark reminder of the stakes. On the Eclipse, Ramirez directed the battle with unwavering focus. "Target their carriers," she ordered. "Cut off their fighter support." "Aye, Admiral," Stark replied, relaying the command to the fleet. The Eclipse shifted its position, drawing the attention of several Krathen ships. They focused their fire on the flagship, their weapons slamming into its shields. Alarms blared as the energy levels dropped to critical. "Shields at 20%, Stark warned. "We can't take much more of this. Divert all auxiliary power to the shields," Ramirez commanded, "and prepare the plasma cannon for a full volley." Vance's voice came through the intercom. "Admiral, if you fire all 3 cannons simultaneously—" "I know the risks, Chief," Ramirez interrupted. "Just make sure they fire." The Eclipse's weapon systems hummed with energy as the plasma cannons charged. The Krathen ships closed in, their weapons blazing. Ramirez waited until the last possible moment, her eyes locked on the tactical display. "Fire!" she shouted. The plasma cannons roared to life, releasing 3 massive bursts of energy that tore through the Krathen fleet. The blasts were so powerful that they disrupted the enemy's formation, creating a gap that Earth's forces exploited ruthlessly. The tide of the battle shifted, and the Krathen began to falter. As the enemy retreated, Ramirez allowed herself a small sigh of relief, but she knew this was only the beginning. The Krathen Empire would not take this defeat lightly. Earth had proven its strength, but the cost of victory was high, and the war was far from over. As the battered remnants of the Krathen fleet retreated into hyperspace, leaving a trail of wreckage and shattered pride in their wake, the Eclipse and the rest of Earth's First Fleet held their position amidst the debris field. The silence on the bridge of the flagship was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of damaged systems being recalibrated. Admiral Sofia Ramirez stood at the center of the command deck, her sharp eyes fixed on the tactical display as it updated with the latest reports. The Krathen might have fled, but Ramirez knew their retreat was not a surrender. It was a prelude to retaliation. "Damage report," she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos still settling around her. Commander Julian Stark stepped forward, a data tablet in hand. "The fleet took heavy losses, Admiral. We've lost the Vanguard, Resolution, and Pioneer. Several other ships are reporting critical damage, and their shields are offline. Casualty numbers are still coming in, but the initial estimates are—" Ramirez closed her eyes for a brief moment, allowing herself the smallest flicker of grief for the lives lost. But she couldn't dwell on it. Not now. There was still work to be done. "And the Eclipse?" she asked, turning her attention back to her own ship. "Shields are holding at 15%, Stark replied. "Plasma cannons are offline for recalibration. Engineering reports that the power core is stable, but we're dangerously close to overheating if we push it again without repairs." "Understood. Prioritize shield restoration and weapons recalibration," Ramirez said. "We need to be ready for a counterattack." Behind her, the communications officer spoke up. "Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from the 2nd and 3rd Fleets. They've arrived in the sector and are awaiting orders." Ramirez's shoulders relaxed ever so slightly. Reinforcements had arrived, and with them the promise of stability amidst the chaos. "Instruct them to form a perimeter around the system. I want every possible entry point monitored. If the Krathen try to re-enter this space, we'll be ready for them." As the orders were relayed, Ramirez turned her attention to the larger picture. The battle had been a victory, but it was far from decisive. The Krathen were a proud and vengeful empire, and they would not let such a public defeat go unanswered. The destruction of their forward fleet had likely only emboldened them to prepare a larger, more devastating assault. Her thoughts were interrupted by a ping from the intelligence officer's station. Admiral, long-range sensors are picking up activity near the Krathen homeworld. It looks like they're mobilizing another fleet, this one significantly larger than the first. Ramirez frowned, her mind racing. How much time do we have? At their current speed, approximately 48 hours, the officer replied. Maybe less if they push their engines to the limit. The weight of the situation pressed down on Ramirez's chest. 2 days was not enough time to repair the damage to the fleet, let alone prepare for another full-scale engagement. Yet retreating wasn't an option either. If they abandoned this system now, it would send a message of weakness, not just to the Krathen, but to every other power in the galaxy. Admiral, Stark said cautiously, "What's our play here? We can't hold this position against another fleet of that size, not in our current state." Ramirez didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped closer to the tactical display, studying the holographic projection of the system. Her mind worked through the possibilities, analyzing every angle, every potential strategy. Finally, she spoke. "We don't need to hold the entire system," she said. "We just need to hold one position. The shipyard. If we deny them access to their shipbuilding infrastructure, we cripple their ability to recover from this loss. The rest of the system can wait." Stark's brow furrowed. "That's a risky move, Admiral. If they bypass us and hit our flanks, then we'll draw them in," Ramirez interrupted, her voice firm. "The Eclipse will lead the defense at the shipyard. The rest of the fleet will form a defensive ring around us, focusing their fire on any ships that try to break through. We'll use the wreckage from the previous battle as cover and bottleneck their approach." It was a bold plan, and everyone on the bridge knew it. But Ramirez had built her career on bold moves, and this one was no exception. "Relay the orders to the fleet," she said, "and prepare for battle. We have 48 hours to turn this battlefield into a fortress." The next 2 days were a blur of activity. Engineers worked around the clock to repair damaged systems and fortify the fleet's defenses. Debris from the destroyed Krathen ships was repurposed into makeshift barriers, creating choke points that would force the enemy to engage on Earth's terms. The shipyard itself was retrofitted with additional weaponry, transforming it into a heavily armed fortress capable of holding its own against a concentrated assault. Dr. Laura Cross found herself pulled into the preparations as well. Though her primary role was in the medical bay, she volunteered to assist with the construction of field hospitals on the nearby asteroid base, which had been repurposed as a fallback point for wounded soldiers. Her hands were steady as she worked, her mind focused on the task at hand. The grief she carried for the Hopebringer was a constant weight, but she channeled it into her efforts, determined to honor the memory of those she had lost. When the Krathen fleet finally arrived, the system was unrecognizable. What had once been a chaotic battleground was now a carefully orchestrated trap, every piece of debris and every asteroid positioned with precision. The Krathen ships surged into the system like a tidal wave, their numbers overwhelming, their firepower devastating. But as they approached the shipyard, they found themselves funneled into narrow lanes of attack, their movements restricted by the very wreckage they had left behind. The battle that followed was unlike anything Ramirez had ever experienced. Earth's fleet fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their ships darting through the debris field to outmaneuver the enemy. The Eclipse stood at the center of it all, its plasma cannons roaring to life once more as it held the line against the Krathen onslaught. The shipyard's newly installed defenses proved invaluable, raining fire down on the advancing enemy and forcing them to divide their attention. Despite the overwhelming odds, the strategy worked. The Krathen were unable to break through the defensive perimeter, their ships falling one by one as Earth's fleet pressed its advantage. When the dust finally settled, the Krathen fleet lay in ruins, their flagship reduced to a smoldering husk. As the battle came to an end, Ramirez allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. They had held the line. They had proven that Earth was not a force to be trifled with. But she knew the war was far from over. The Krathen would return, And when they did, humanity would need to be ready. For now, though, they had won. And that was enough. The aftermath of the battle left the system cloaked in a heavy silence. Wreckage drifted aimlessly through the void, the remnants of countless ships, both Krathen and human, forming a graveyard of twisted metal. For a moment it seemed as though the galaxy itself held its breath, watching and waiting to see what humanity would do next. On board the Eclipse, Admiral Sofia Ramirez stood on the bridge, her expression as hard as the steel walls surrounding her. The battle had been won, but the cost had been staggering. Reports from across the fleet painted a grim picture. 3 more ships lost, dozens more critically damaged, and hundreds of lives snuffed out in the fires of war. Yet amidst the losses, there was a sense of grim accomplishment. They had held the line. They had stopped the Krathen. But Ramirez knew the battle had not been the end. It was merely a chapter in a much larger war. "Commander Stark," she said, her voice cutting through the subdued hum of the bridge. "Status on the fleet?" Stark, standing at her side, consulted his data tablet. He looked worn, the lines on his face deeper than they had been just days before. "We've stabilized most of the damaged ships, but they're in no condition to fight. The second and third fleets are relatively intact, but they're running low on munitions. Repairs to the shipyard defenses are underway, but we're stretched thin. And the Krathen?" Ramirez pressed. "They're retreating," Stark replied. "Our long-range sensors show the remnants of their fleet heading back to their territory. No signs of reinforcements yet." Ramirez nodded, her mind already racing ahead. The Krathen might be regrouping, but she had no illusions that this was over. They were a proud and vengeful empire, and the humiliation of losing not 1 but 2 battles would only fuel their determination to strike back. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, drawing her attention. "Incoming transmission from Earth. It's General Kane." "Put him through," Ramirez ordered. The holographic display in the center of the bridge flickered to life, and the stern visage of General Thomas Kane appeared. His eyes were as sharp as ever, but there was a heaviness in his expression that matched Ramirez's own. "Admiral," Kane began, his voice steady, "congratulations on the victory. Your leadership saved the shipyard, and possibly the entire sector. The President sends her gratitude." "Thank you, General," Ramirez replied, though there was no pride in her tone. "But this was no victory, not really. We've bought ourselves time, but that's all." Kane nodded grimly. "Agreed. The Krathen won't take this defeat lightly. Intelligence reports indicate they're already rallying their allies. If they succeed, we could be facing a coalition far larger than anything we've seen so far." Ramirez's jaw tightened. "Then we need to act before they can." "Precisely," Kane said. "The President has authorized a counteroffensive. A task force will be assembled to strike deep into Krathen territory. The goal is to disrupt their supply lines, dismantle their infrastructure, and force them to the negotiating table." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "And you're assigning me to lead this task force?" Kane gave a faint smile. "You've proven you're the best person for the job. The Eclipse and what remains of the First Fleet will spearhead the operation. You'll have the full support of Earth's resources, as well as whatever reinforcements we can muster from our allies." Ramirez exhaled slowly. The weight of the responsibility was immense, but she knew she couldn't refuse. "Understood, General. We'll begin preparations immediately." As the transmission ended, Ramirez turned back to her crew. "You heard the General. This fight isn't over. Begin recalibrating the fleet and coordinate with the second and third fleets. We have a war to finish." The bridge erupted into activity, each officer throwing themselves into their tasks with renewed purpose. Ramirez watched them for a moment, her gaze lingering on their faces. They were exhausted, battered by the horrors of battle, but they kept going. It was their resilience that gave her hope, even in the face of such overwhelming odds. In the days that followed, the fleet worked tirelessly to prepare for the counteroffensive. Engineers toiled around the clock to repair ships, replenish supplies, and upgrade weaponry. Messages were sent to Earth's allies rallying support for the mission, and amidst it all, Ramirez and her senior officers strategized, poring over maps and intelligence reports to devise the most effective plan of attack. Dr. Laura Cross played a vital role during this time, not just as a healer but as a symbol of what they were fighting for. Her survival of the Hopebringer tragedy had become a rallying cry for the fleet, a reminder of the stakes they faced. She worked tirelessly in the medical bay, tending to the wounded and inspiring those around her with her unwavering determination. Finally, the day came. The fleet, now reinforced with additional ships and personnel, assembled near the edge of Crathan space. Ramirez stood on the bridge of the eclipse, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. This would be their most dangerous mission yet, a direct assault on the heart of the Crathan Empire. But she knew they had no choice. The only way to end the war was to take the fight to the enemy. "Admiral," Stark said, his voice breaking the silence, "the fleet is ready. Your orders?" Ramirez took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Engage hyperspace drives. Set course for Crathan Prime." As the fleet surged forward into the unknown, Ramirez allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of the lives they had lost, the sacrifices they had made, and the hope they still carried. This war had tested humanity in ways it had never been tested before. But it had also shown their strength, their resilience, and their refusal to back down in the face of tyranny. Whatever awaited them on the other side, Ramirez knew one thing for certain. They would not falter. Humanity had proven that it was not to be underestimated, and the galaxy would remember this moment for generations to come. The fleet disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind the wreckage of battles past and surging toward the promise of a better future. A future worth fighting for.